you for attending our business connection. We try to do this every so often to provide some information to business partners and others who may be interested in topics that are related. It could be to training, it might be to marketing. We do a whole host of informational topics. We also have a podcast that we do. So please check out our page, our business and industry page on the Marine Park website for more. Today, we are going to be talking about universal design, intentional design that includes everyone. I am Kelly Karpinski. I'm a business development manager in the economic and workforce development area of Marine Park Technical College, but I will be passing it off to Alyssa Hallgren. Alyssa is an accommodations specialist here at Marine Park Technical College, and she is our expert who is going to be sharing information on universal design. So Alyssa, I will let you take it from here. Thank you and welcome.
Thanks, Kelly. So today will just be, the large umbrella overview. Universal design, you can have an entire master's degree program in it. There's so many aspects to it. So this is going to be kind of the appetizer version. And so if you want to go and learn how to cook the whole meal, there's certainly other resources out there, and I'll talk about what those are. So today we're going to cover, what is universal design, where you may have seen it before, because I think you'll be surprised to know that you interact with universal design on a daily basis. We'll talk about how it can benefit your team, how you can implement it, and then, like I said, some of those resources and where you can go for help if you're trying to infuse universal design into something that you're working on and you get stuck, or if you just want to dive deeper into learning more about it. Just a quick side note, I am known to talk fast, so if you need me to pump the brakes, just let me know. So the first thing is just, what is universal design? So the textbook definition is that it's the design and composition of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability, by considering the diverse needs and abilities of all throughout the design process. Universal design creates products, services, and environments that meet people's needs. Simply put, universal design is good design. So I come from a disability resources and disability services perspective where, I'm shifting from the accommodation process of this doesn't work for this individual person, so I'm going to modify it for this individual person, shifting to the universal design of how can this course, this project, this presentation work for everybody regardless of their ability or their disability or their age or whatever other factor there is, so that accommodations aren't needed. And that's a huge, huge piece because we know that the gamut of human experience is so wide. And so there may be things that we weren't expecting, factors we weren't expecting. And so this process isn't going to, at least in the short term, remove the need for accommodations for certain people, but it's going to reduce the number of accommodation requests that you're receiving, and it's going to allow more people to fully participate. Even if they wouldn't technically qualify for accommodation, they'll be able to absorb more and interact more and gain more from whatever it is that you're working on. So when you're thinking about this, design for your future self or design for your current self, depending on where you're at in life. The disability community is a unique one in that you can join at any time and you don't always get to choose when you join, or you very rarely get to choose when you join. But think about if you lose your vision, you have aging eyes, you have great vision, but you've been at a screen for 8 hours already. That screen glare can really be affected. Color blindness is not typically something that you acquire, but it is something that affects a lot of people. So keeping that in mind while you're designing is going to be really important. Also think about cognitive barriers. So some folks may have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, a learning disability, a language barrier, all of those things someone could be coming in with. Or just situationally, you could be tired, you could be distracted, Hopefully you're not, but you could be hungover. So there's so many things that could affect your your cognitive ability to participate in a program or activity. So, um, again, tired and distracted can happen to all of us. Again, with hearing, you could be deaf or hard of hearing, or your user could be deaf or hard of hearing, but it could also just be a noisy environment. So we're all working from all over the place these days, and so we never know what kind of, you know, auditory distraction could come in and impact our ability to participate in a training that we're doing. Or even if you are in the office, not all of our coworkers are used to being back in the office, and so maybe their etiquette has um, maybe it needs a little bit of work too. And so you could be in a noisy environment even if you aren't at home. And then we also have some things that could impact your interactions. So, arthritis, repetitive motion injuries or disabilities, amputation, and then there's just fatigue and weakness. Maybe you started a new exercise routine and you're feeling it today. All of those things can impact the way that you interact, particularly um, particularly in an in-person training or if there's any physical component, but even just your ability to maintain sitting at a computer. And then technology, if you haven't run into any of these issues, I would salute you and figure out how you did it. But equipment quality, software version, and internet connectivity are all variable factors that can impact someone's ability to participate. So, one of the great examples of universal design is closed captioning. And so we look at closed captioning and, for the cognitive piece, if you're tired or distracted, it can help you focus. If there's a language barrier, sometimes hearing it and reading it, you have different abilities. If it's a noisy environment, you can tune into the closed captions. And then with the technology, if all of a sudden our audio isn't working, you can still read the closed captions on the video. So, oops, I apologize. I just exited out of there. So all of those are examples of ways that universal design, one piece of universal design can meet so many different needs. I apologize. So there's 7 key principles of universal design. I'm just going to focus on 4 of them today. Just again, this is the appetizer version. So principle 1 is equitable use. And so that's the design is useful and marketable to people of diverse abilities. The second principle is flexible use. So the design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. So you can interact with something in multiple different ways depending on what works best for you. The third principle is simple and intuitive use. So use of the design is easy to understand regardless of the user's experience, knowledge, language skills, or current concentration levels. So as employers are bringing in a lot of new employees just because of, the labor market is changing, we're bringing in people that maybe have a different background or have not been working in this field for as long. And so simple and intuitive use as part of your training. If they don't need to learn how to be trained, then they can focus on what they're learning in the training, if that makes sense. And then the fourth principle is perceptible information. So the design communicates necessary information effectively to the user, regardless of ambient conditions or the user's sensory abilities. So providing things in writing, spoken or through like an audio piece, as well as a visual piece. Those are all helpful. So I'm going to give some examples of where we've seen this before. So curb cuts were initially created for wheelchair users so they could access the sidewalk, because prior to that, they were, kind of restricted to ambulating on the streets, which is a safety concern. But it also helps parents who are pushing strollers, grandparents who are pushing strollers. If you're pulling a wagon, if you ever had a paper route as a kid before you could drive and you were pulling the wagon full of papers, delivery personnel really benefit from curb cuts, and children biking. If again, it's not safe for them to be on the road, those curb cuts help everyone. You'll also notice in this picture, on the curb cuts, you'll often see that yellow patch of metal, and it's typically pretty bumpy. The reason that exists is for people who are blind or visually impaired. The bumps allow them, if they're using a white cane, to tactily feel that they are nearing a roadway. And if they do have residual vision, the yellow is high contrast. So they're able, again, for safety, to say you are entering a roadway. Those bumps also help in Wisconsin in the winter when it's icy and slippery and you're going down a slight hill. So you have a little bit more grip and you're less likely to fall. So again, multiple uses. The design that helps one problem also helps another. Another example, like I talked about with closed captions, originally designed for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, but it helps in loud areas. If you're, watching videos in the waiting room of some business or a hospital or clinic and you don't want everybody else to hear, but you forgot your earbuds, you're able to do that. If you have difficulty focusing, there's actually been a lot of studies for folks with ADHD where closed captionings are a huge piece of access for them. If you're interacting with really new terminology. And this is where it's important to make sure that the closed captioning is accurate. It can help if you can hear it and read it at the same time. And also if you're interacting with someone with a different accent or dialect, or who, like me, sometimes gets ahead of themselves and talks a little bit too fast. So it really, again, helps everyone. And then finally, the automatic door openers is another example that folks see all the time. So whether it's a button or a sensor, originally designed for folks with mobility concerns who either didn't have the physical strength to pull the door open or push the door open, or are using their hands to ambulate and then wouldn't be able to hold the door. Also helps if your hands are full. You're bringing in stuff, you're trying to be efficient with your time. You're bringing in a cart or a stroller, again, delivery personnel. And it also helps for remote security options, being that that is electronic. A lot of those systems allow, because it's an automatic door and it's electronic, that you can lock it from everywhere. So for example, for here at Moraine Park, if it's a door with one of those switches, our security officer can automatically lock or unlock, depending on what the emergency is, remotely. So it's helpful there too. All right, I'm just going to quick pause. Any questions or things that I'm not being clear on so far? All right. So again, it does benefit everyone. And so those specific examples, you could kind of see the benefits, but I'm just going to speak a little bit to the overall benefits of universal design. So the first is satisfaction and retention, both of customers and employees. So if people feel like they are welcomed and interacted and they're able to interact in a way that works for them, they're more likely to come back, they're more likely to stick around, rather than having all of these barriers or the rigidity of a system that does not allow them to do the work in a way that works for them. It also increases independence by increasing efficiency and decreasing training time in some areas. Again, if you don't need to learn how to access the training, you can focus on the training itself, and that is a better use of everyone's time. Longevity, again, similar to the satisfaction and retention piece, allowing multiple ways of doing something, so that someone ages or acquires a disability, they're more likely able to continue. If there's flexibility in the way a job is, we're less likely to lose a really good person as something unexpected happens in their life. There's also social benefits. So we know that the inclusion of a more diverse population and increased social participation benefits everyone. So if people who were previously marginalized because of a disability or their age or a language barrier are now able to come and be a part of your agency or your organization, that's going to benefit them, but it's also going to benefit the folks who have already been there, especially if everybody is able to participate in a meaningful way. It promotes a positive public image. So for example, if you're a home chef like me, and I use chef loosely, but the OXO brand of products, originally their OXO good grips were for people with arthritis, but now they're just seen as being a super high quality product line that people with or without arthritis are going to use. And so it's being inclusive has allowed them to stand out in a really crowded market as a high quality product, and has resulted in a positive public image. And then the legal compliance piece. So standards and guidelines, they provide the practical guidance of how to comply with the legislation. And the specifications and minimum requirements provided in standards and guidelines often include accessibility and usability requirements or recommendations, but that's the floor. And so if we're, with regard to the design of a product, service, or environment, universal design, it promotes compliance and has the potential for improving accessibility beyond that minimum requirement. So there's compliant, and then there's accessible, and then there's universal design. And so really getting to that top level, if you're already way up there, you're less likely to be playing catch up as the law evolves. And especially with digital accessibility right now, that law is changing as more and more things come online. If you make your initial design with accessibility and universal design in mind, you're less likely to have to go back and remediate whatever product you've created. So I just have a little case study here from the Tesco grocery store and their website. So they're over in Europe. I tried to use an example that wasn't super local because I don't want to call anybody out. But essentially their problem was that in the year 2000, they were made aware that their website was not accessible to blind users. A lot of times this made aware is threatened litigation. And so they wanted to provide a solution. And so they launched a new easy access version of Tesco.com in 2001. And for those 4 years, they had 2 separate websites. So they had their accessible website for the people who were blind or visually impaired. And then they had their website that was just their general website. But then in 2005, they merged those websites together and provided all of those features to all of their customers. As a result, in the 2002-2003, web-based sales made a profit of 12.2 million euros, which is more than 30 times the profit made in the previous year. So by increasing their accessibility for, the blind population, which I guarantee you is not 30 times the population of the regular grocery store customers in Europe, their profits from that website increased 30-fold. That's huge. That's huge. And so as you're looking to have that similar result, to making sure that you're not leaving out potential customers, potential employees, or potential partners, you got to figure out where to start. And so I really encourage folks to start small. Identify hangups and where someone has failed in the past. Learn from your mistakes, as hard as it is to look back at. Ooh, Susan really struggled with this training and ended up leaving because she was so frustrated. Or, oh, we really lost, Edgar, and he was a great employee, but, once his, whatever happened as he aged, he wasn't able to do the job anymore. Identify those hangups and make those small changes. There's also a lot of accessibility checkers if you're in the digital environment, or if you're creating a print resource, so you can check for contrast, you can check for font size, you can check for the ability for it to be read with screen readers. And small changes like that can make a huge difference. A lot of the accessibility features that folks build in with alternative text for images and those kinds of things also help with search engine optimization, because it allows for more keywords to be put in there that would normally not be picked up if it was just in an image format. So again, that accessibility and that universal design is pushing into just all over better design. We also recommend that you talk to a variety of users. So talk to internal people who have already been doing it. I bet if you ask the question in an open and inviting way, they're going to be happy to share ways that it could be improved. Also talk to external customers or folks who are using it for the first time. And then talk to prospective. So people who have never interacted with that training or that process or that program, and ask what concerns they have, what has prevented them from participating, or if they were to participate, what would they want or need to see in order to feel comfortable moving forward with pursuing that opportunity. Ensuring that the design works for your current and future teams is, again, going to reduce those hangups and make everything so much smoother. And then as you're making the change, this is some just general change management advice. Share the what, so what is going to be changing, and then share the why. When you're sharing the why, when the why is universal design, it eliminates that feeling of like, oh, I don't want to say like we're just changing this because Joe can't do it this way. You're sharing, we're going to do this so it's more flexible. It can work with a variety of learning styles or a variety of users, making this so this works better for you so you don't have to work so hard at it. You can really share the why in a way that shows that you're looking out for your people. And then evaluate the difference. You might not get it right. That's okay. That happens whether you're looking at universal design or any other kind of change, but evaluate the difference and see if it's something that you need to either, it went really well, so you need to expand to other areas, or, ooh, did not go as planned. Maybe we need to, kind of go back. The results are going to speak for themselves. And so if you have folks who are hesitant to adopt this change, if you have hard data that can show the results, so for example, I'm sure it was a lot of work to integrate those 2 Tesco websites, but if they're able to show, hey, this increased our sales 30-fold through the website, that's going to be really hard to argue with. So when the next project like that comes up, there's going to be more buy-in. In a training environment, under the principle of multiple means of engagement, make it relevant to their daily life. So not how they engage, but why they engage. You can address, their motivation, their learning style, their background knowledge, all of those things to figure out why they engage. Adult learners need a why. Making it relevant to their daily life, as I said, whether it's their daily life at work or at home, are there any sub skills that are also learned from this training? So it's a training about the Microsoft Office suite, and folks are like, I know the Microsoft Office suite. Why am I wasting my time on this? If you can, make the pieces of the training relevant that are maybe sub skills. So, time management or interpersonal skills or project management or even note taking, if you can, say because of the way that this training is designed, yes, it's focused on the Microsoft Office suite. However, you're also going to get some of these other things that you'll be able to integrate. That's a way to increase, that with the multiple means of engagement. Provide different options for demonstrating knowledge. So if at the end there's like a check your competency, a lot of times, especially for longer seminars and things, it'll be a present out, or it will be write an essay or take a quiz. And not everybody is really able to apply and conceptualize the knowledge that they just gained in that short of a time, or they don't feel comfortable presenting in front of large groups or even small groups of people. And so if you say, okay, I need you to apply this knowledge, and you can either A, B, or C, make a presentation, write a report, do a thing, or teach it to somebody else, that is going to solidify that knowledge for them, but also reduce the pushback in participating in the training in the first place. Encourage learners to connect the material to their passion. So back to, the Microsoft Office suite. If they're like, this is just not exciting to me, if there's something that you can do to make the project kind of hit with something that they like. So if you're in an environment where there's some really big like football rivalries, make your examples relate to football. And then people are more likely to, have a piece of it that they enjoy, so they'll be able to move more quickly and learn more from the training itself. And then allow low stakes self assessment. So, knowledge checks throughout the training without pressure, penalty, or judgment allows the learners to check in with themselves and kind of adjust. So, if after the first hour we did a little check in and someone's feeling really not great about how they're doing, or they realize that they're not absorbing all of that, that little check-in is going to allow them to self-assess and say, maybe I need to change the way I'm doing this, or maybe I have to think about this a different way. And that's going to allow them to engage more in the rest of the training. For multiple means of representation, that second principle that we talked about, presenting information in a variety of formats. So, handouts like charts or articles, different ways for people to conceptualize the information, having a variety of videos versus discussion and lecture. This will address, the perception, the language, the comprehension, and attention piece. Everybody's going to grab on a little bit more to one thing or another. If there's any kind of language barrier or reading disability and you hand everybody an article, they're not going to be, or even an attention barrier, they're not going to be able to engage with that, and then are less likely to be able to participate in the rest of the training. You can also, sorry, I skipped too far ahead again, but try pre-teaching vocabulary or providing a list of terms. So especially with acronyms and industry specific terms, we don't want to lose people right away when we start talking about, the HVAC and all of these other things. If we can provide that list so people are not immediately discouraged and feeling stupid, they're more likely to be like, oh no, what does that mean? They can look it up. Okay, I can participate and I can focus again on what the person's saying versus trying to figure out what that acronym or specific term means. If you provide electronic versions of all resources, that will allow folks who utilize screen readers, screen readers to access the material if it's just in print. There are some technologies that can allow print to be read aloud, but they're not necessarily the most reliable, and sometimes they're quite expensive. But if you also are able to, depending on the nature of what you're doing, provide electronic versions of the resources in advance, for folks who require a little bit more processing time, they can do some pre-work and work on that as well. And I'll talk about pre-work in a little bit again, because overlapping content is really important. And so, you know, we just watched a video about something, and now we're going to break into small groups and discuss. So some people are going to get a lot from the video, other people aren't, but they're going to really catch on from the discussion and then be able to engage in the rest. And then the varied pre-work. So again, if you can provide it in advance, it allows for that extra processing time. But if you provide varied pre-work, so you say, hey, before our training, please, take 30 minutes to either read this article or watch this video. People are then able to engage and process ahead of time in a way that works for them. So kind of just that extra step that will allow for a more meaningful dialogue at whatever training you're doing. For the principle around multiple means of action and expression, allow learners to demonstrate their knowledge. So this would, addressing physical ability, their strategic and organizational differences and communication preferences, if we can allow them to provide any kind of demonstration of their knowledge instead of it has to be this, maybe it's a test or an application or a project or a paper or a presentation, you're going to get a lot more value. And then if those are then shared, those application projects or the demonstrations of knowledge are shared at the end, you're also going to have that many more resources to share with other learners who may learn in very different ways. Excuse me. So you can also support learners when options can't be provided. So for example, if you're doing something that is handed down from you or handed down to you from the state or for some other governing body, and you're not able to change the assessment that has to happen at the end, you can still support your learners. So you can provide different types of support like modeling, examples, rubrics, checklists. You can allow them to, if you're able to, work in groups or with partners, have discussions, practice throughout your training, and then providing that feedback as they go. So even if they still have to do one specific end assessment, whether it's a presentation or an application, whatever, and you're worried that because you're not able to allow those multiple means of action and expression, that they're going to struggle, you can support them through that process by providing that modeling or those checklists, those kinds of things. So I didn't know how many people to expect, so I'm not going to put any of the participants that are here on the spot, just because I don't want to do that to anybody. But taking all of this in, if I was doing this as a training about anything else, what should I have done differently to make this a more universally designed presentation?
Does anyone on the meeting have any ideas, or you can put them into chat as well if you do? I mean, I know later, we will be putting this on the website with YouTube. I think that there would be captions, once it's on YouTube. So certainly there's something after the fact that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. And if this was a live seminar for a lot of people or a wider audience of in or live or in person, There is real-time captioning or cart services that are available.
Mhm.
Again, if I can plan for the amount of people, I could do small group activities or
Mhm.
discussions. After I reviewed the examples, I could have asked folks, in a group of 2 or on your own to come up with more examples of where you've seen this in your real life and kind of have them dig for that.
Mhm.
Could do an application exercise at the end. Um,
Um,
and there was something that
Ashley is just saying, I think the email that she received gave some insight on the content, so it was very helpful.
yeah. So setting the stage so you're not coming in completely unaware of what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so as you're moving forward with this, there are some more resources that you can use. So there's so much out there because we're honestly talking about every single environment in which we could interact or share information. So in person, over the web, all of that stuff. So there's accessibledesignlab.com, universaldesign.ie, and humancentereddesign.org are the three. We're not affiliated with them in any way, but they're the 3 resources that I find really helpful. And in this, there's a very subtle example of universal design that I used. So if you look at the website, accessibledesignlab.com, I didn't have to capitalize any of those letters. But by capitalizing them, same thing with hashtags, if you capitalize the first letter of every word, even if you're smushing them all together, a screen reader can make sense of them for a person who's blind or visually impaired using a screen reader. B, as a regular person, if especially the word accessible is not something that a lot of people see in their day-to-day lives, if you just saw Accessible Design Lab, sometimes that's a little bit, you have to wrap it around your head, or there's sometimes where a word has a word built in within it and you can't tell what they're actually trying to say. So just by capitalizing the first letter of every word in a hashtag or in a website is a little piece that can help it be more universally designed.
That's a great tip. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'm available for general questions. Like I said, there are folks out there with so much more knowledge than I am, so I would really encourage you to use your resources that I shared there and participate. I know that there's some online communities around universal design and even some like I said, master's degree programs if you're really looking to get into the weeds on it. So yeah, I'm really glad that you all participated and were interested in learning more.
Does anyone have any questions for Alyssa before we jump off? And again, you can put it in the chat. I have a couple, Alyssa, so if anyone else does, please let us know. Okay, so don't want to put you on the spot, but I guess I will. Can you give really early on, you mentioned that you uh, you know, do some help with some modifications with Moraine Park courses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you give some examples, maybe that wouldn't be so obvious, and so if you can't think of one, it's okay. But
No, no problem. So my role as an accommodation specialist is really working individually with students. They come to me and share what their disability related barrier is. They share documentation to back that up. And then I look at that information and then their course information to see what accommodation needs to be made to ensure full access. And so, it's really quite varied. It's everything from an amplified stethoscope um, to, there's other devices where maybe you can't, maybe you're deaf. You can be a deaf nurse. And so instead of taking the stethoscope and going through amplification, if you're profoundly deaf, there's other ways to perceive, you know, things going on in the lungs. There's other ways to perceive your pulse or your heart rate, those kinds of things that don't involve auditory stimulation. So that's one example. The more common examples are the ones that we see all the time. Are students who, because of a learning disability or processing disability, really struggle with keeping up with what the instructor is saying and getting it down in their notes in a meaningful way. And So we use that there's an accommodation where students can record their lectures. It's an app that we use. They can also put timestamps on that lecture. And so for those students, they're really able to focus on what's being said instead of how to get it down in a meaningful way they can use later. They can listen back to it and then take their notes as they're hearing it the second time. This also works really well for students who have any kind of limb difference, or difference with their hands or unable to use those things. If they have carpal tunnel syndrome and just aren't able to type or write for long periods of time. So that's one accommodation, that note-taking support app that works for a huge range of folks with disabilities.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And I think that my other question, I think it's really just a reiteration because I had the question, I think you answered it, but just thinking about the businesses we work with, and whether it's a training, or I know that a lot of businesses will do what they call town hall meetings, where maybe they get, an entire group or perhaps an entire department or whatever it might be together. I guess I don't see, you mentioned early on a disability. It may not be kind of an official, what we think of off the top of our head, right? It might not be somebody in a wheelchair or somebody who's, hearing impaired or whatever. It may be, we're really tired, or maybe, like you said, aging eyes and those types of things. I don't see those people coming forward necessarily, right? They don't want to share this information. So, how do you know? It sounds like you ask. Would that be correct? Like, is it too much to kind of try to make as much accommodations as possible to include everyone, knowing they may not be coming forward and sharing this information willingly?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. We have an aging workforce, and we have, in our current economic environment, more people with disabilities participating in the workforce than ever before. And a lot of disabilities are invisible. Myself, I am a person with a disability, and you see me walking down the hall and no one has any idea. And so no one has to disclose. They have the right to maintain that and be private about that. And especially when it comes to issues around aging, it's really sensitive, and folks don't want to be vulnerable, and because it kind of sometimes feels that they're admitting that they can no longer do what they once did. And that's a really hard thing to accept, much less admit. And then there is possibly the fear of losing the job that is the only thing they've ever known. And so they're very likely not to come forward. And that's where it becomes kind of the responsibility of the employer. If they really want this information to be engaged with employees, they just, even if they're not going to come forward, even if you can't ask them directly, or if you do ask them directly and they don't share anything, to think about it a little bit in advance and say, hey, we're reviewing this presentation as we're preparing. And I just thought of, my uncle would never be able to interact with this because, he can't sit still that long. We need to add an activity where people get up and moving. Or, I'm just a person where I can't sit still that long. Or I need to engage or have a discussion in order for this material to stick. Or hey, this is really fine when I'm looking at my computer, but when I stand in the back of this really large conference room, um, I can't see what that chart says on the PowerPoint. So it
Mhm.
takes a little extra mindfulness on behalf of the person who's presenting or preparing the training, because there is a lot of times where you're just not going to get that honest information from folks, either because they don't want to admit it to you, but sometimes they aren't even ready to admit it to themselves yet.
Mhm.
We also, sorry, really long tangent. We also have a lot of folks, specifically of a certain age, who have undiagnosed learning disabilities, who are always told that they were just dumb or lazy or all of these other things. When in reality, we just didn't understand enough about learning disabilities or ADHD when they were going through the K-12 system. And so they may not have any kind of diagnosis, but reading is a barrier for them. So providing that in
Mhm.
multiple methods is going to allow them to engage and maintain some pride about their ability to engage.
Mhm. Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was a great answer. Does anybody else have any questions for Alyssa before we jump off? All right. Well, seeing none, Alyssa, thank you so much. This was a great presentation. I think very helpful, and gives everybody some things to think about. Like I said, whether you're sending something out to everyone for information, whether you're training, whether you're just meeting, whatever it might be, there's things we have to keep in mind. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you so much. Take
All
care.
right. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.
You too.